Hello, friends, and welcome to Home is Where the Body Is. I'm Jen, an ADHD woman with EDS, POTS, complex PTSD, and OCD, shaped by an abusive religious upbringing. I spent much of my life feeling like I was balancing precariously over an endless pit, constantly reaching for a stable home that always seemed just out of reach. Today, I can honestly say that home is wherever I am right now, built on the stable ground that's growing out of a deepening relationship with my body and myself. In this podcast, I share the lived experiences that brought me here, in case it helps someone feel less alone or supports them on their own journey home. Today, I'd like to talk about how I came to a pattern recognition of how neurodivergence and connective tissue disability and generational trauma converged to create a lifelong sense of alienation. And by connective tissue disability, I of course mean EDS. Sorry, excuse me. Had a bit of a cry yesterday, and it affected my voice. But to give a little bit of background on my story, I am an only child of two, from what I can tell, very traumatized, and in my mother's case, very disabled parents, with a very dysfunctional, abusive marriage, in the case of my dad abusing my mom. And she did try to divorce him in the 90s and failed, I think, or gave up, it seems, because the court did not give her enough child support and alimony for her to live on, at least in my opinion. So I grew up in a cult. They were both in a cult, and of course we could delve into there of how autistic people are more likely to join cults, and I do believe that my mother is autistic and also has EDS. I got it from somebody. But I won't, that's a topic for another time. I'll just mention that for now as sort of an explanation as to how I ended up growing up in a cult, a conservative religious cult, as the emotional center of two traumatized adults. So, I, from a very young age, was, responsible for their emotions, and nobody was responsible for my emotions. So I also learned to fake affection to stay safe. It would trigger anger and punishment and all of these things and shame if on their part, they would be angry at me and shame me and all of these things. If, particularly my dad would, if it did not seem that I loved them or was excited to see them or wanted to do things with them and all of these things. Because I think they were depending on me being a happy, loving, okay child in order for them to feel okay and for them to feel love and belonging and all of those things. And then I, of course, eventually left the cult, stopped talking to my parents. I'm estranged from both of them. I'm estranged from actually anybody who is related to me by birth or marriage. I'm estranged from, other than one aunt who I talk to in a limited way. But then, of course, I was diagnosed as autistic at the age of 29, EDS at the age of 30. I am 32 now, for the record. Excuse me. And these are, of course, overlapping genetic differences in the sense that autistic people are more likely to have EDS, and people with EDS are more likely to be autistic. And So I think it's a really interesting interplay between the two, right? Like, I've read What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu about, I think she focuses on generational trauma of like the Asian diaspora. Diaspora? I never know if I'm pronouncing words correctly because I never hear them spoken. I only see them written. Um, but anyway, and I thought that was a very profound way to look at things. And so I think the same way you can kind of look at like autistic EDSers, particularly the women, um, since EDS symptoms um, primarily or seem to be worse in women. And, due to lack of, or seem to be worse in people who have lower testosterone, less testosterone. So I just think it's interesting how they can, for me, it feels like it interacts. It feels like my body functions differently than everybody else's body. My brain functions differently than everybody else's brain. And I think this puts me in this, and all of us, right, who are autistic with EDS, in this like intense feeling of alienation of like, for me, I feel like I'm built on like different principles of operation, both my body and my brain. So that is the bit of background. But now let's talk about what changed inside of me when I came to this realization, and what emotions and such did it bring up. So I think recognizing this pattern, right, of how neurodivergence, and by neurodivergence, I don't just mean autistic and ADHD, but also complex PTSD and OCD, which are two other things I have. I'm neurodivergent by nature and also neurodivergent by nurture. But how, I think recognizing that pattern of how neurodivergence and EDS, physical disability, and like generational trauma, of course, being tied into that, kind of converged in me and converges in a lot of us. But I think recognizing that was powerful because it sort of gave me a name or an explanation for what I was experiencing, and so I could stop blaming myself, right? Shame, self-blame, alienation, self-erasure started to become comprehension, grief, context, self-trust. Not overnight, by any means, right? It's been several years, or I guess closer to like 2 years, several years since I began to suspect I was autistic, maybe. So I've been on this journey for a while, but I do think noticing that pattern or that explanation, giving me words to label these experiences with and to explain why, right? I think it's a feeling that a lot of us feel when we are late diagnosed. And I think it can happen when you're late diagnosed with anything, right? Like late diagnosed as autistic with a physical disability that doctors didn't catch or were ignoring because you're a woman, and female pain is ignored and stuff like that. I'm I think it can also probably come from, like, I didn't fully recognize my bisexuality until recently either, and so I think anything where you kind of come into an understanding of who you are later in life can provide this sort of therapeutic explanation for certain sufferings that you've had, and so you can stop blaming yourself. And I think the key part is it allowed me to stop blaming myself and start blaming my environment, right? The problem is not me. The problem is not how I operate. The problem is that I was born into an environment, into a society, right, into capitalism that does not make space for who I am. And that's not a problem with me. That's a problem with the environment. So I also realized during this shift, right, that I wasn't raised to belong. I was raised to stabilize. I wasn't raised with love and belonging. I was raised to provide love and belonging to grown-ass adults. That's, a child, using a child as a stabilizing pillar is crushing to the child, and that is never the child's fault. And I realized that I was never given a home, but I was forced to become a home for others, both to my parents, but also in a way, I feel like, to the world in general. And what I mean by that is so being a home to my parents, a home is somewhere where you're able to rest and feel safe and put down your burdens and be warm and cozy and comfy, and not have to go out of your way for other people or that sort of thing. It's your space that's made specifically for you. And so being a home for my parents instead of them providing a home for me, and of course I'm using home in the figurative sense, not literal walls. We all know that home is far more than just the walls and ceiling and roof and floor and all of those things. So my parents desperately needed a place that they could feel safe and loved and warm and cozy. And to be honest, I don't think they ever felt more truly safe and warm and cozy. I think that anybody who deals with that type of marginalization, in my mom's case, and trauma, in both of their cases, I think it's kind of about forcing a place that allows you to survive at that point rather than an actual home. But the point being, they desperately needed a place of emotional sort of safety, I guess, fake emotional safety in a sense like that. And so I was forced to provide that, right? That their emotions were safe with me. I wasn't supposed to have emotions or needs of my own, but was just supposed to accept theirs. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of children have that type of experience, but that's sort of to explain what I meant by I was not given a place of safety for my emotions and feelings and experiences, but rather held to the standard of being that place of safety for two, again, grown-ass adults. And I think, in a way, those of us who are neurodivergent, but also just even physically disabled and just marginalized in other ways, I do think the way that we are forced to accommodate the majority in order to survive, because we are the edge cases, and it's society functions such that it's more so that the edge cases have to, the people on the tail of the normal distribution have to accommodate the people in the center, rather than what it should be, which is the other way around. Because by default, norms and the way things are done by default are always going to fall in the center of the normal distribution. That's kind of how it works. Because the majority of people want them to be that way. So, anyway, I feel like I'm getting a little off track. The point is to say that I do think it is sort of a way of being, in my head, I sort of see it as being forced to provide a home for others is kind of that sense of having to adapt yourself and everything you naturally do to accommodate people who are the quote norm, right? And I think people who live in that norm have way less experience of having to accommodate others in that way, sacrifice who they are and how they naturally operate in order to make others comfortable in the same way that we at the tails of the distribution have to do so. So that was a long explanation, but that's what I mean by I feel like both in my immediate family and in the world in general, I have never been given a home, but more forced to become a home for other people, help other people feel more comfortable in their home, sort of thing. If that makes sense, I hope it does. Excuse me. So, yes, in conclusion, in conclusion of this specific idea about what changed and shifted inside of me when I deeply recognized this pattern, and by that I mean not just mentally recognize, but like really feel in my body that this is true and this resonates, and it's not fair and it's not right, and it's not fair or right that I was made to believe that this was my fault, right? That I needed to fix it rather than the environment needs to change. So, being able to name and explain what had happened and what was still happening to me, because when I came to this realization, I had put the cult and my parents behind me, but of course those things still continue to affect you, and was still and am still living in a society in which I very much struggle to support myself, to both support myself financially, but also to find like social support and all of these things. So, I felt the power of being able to name and explain what had happened and still was happening to me. And the key part, the power of refusing to allow it to continue. And I think that's kind of a key point of, or something that at least I have often discounted, is the power of refusing to allow a certain type of gaslighting or brainwashing or lying, like whatever you want to call it, to refuse to allow that to continue, at least internally. Because I think there are a lot of times where we can't necessarily change externally, or at least not on our own, or not anytime soon, right? Like, I can't change that every workplace I've been in has been wildly overwhelming, overstimulating, and quite frankly, I think extremely discriminatory just kind of by default in ways that people don't even realize. And I can't change that. But what I can do is internally say, that's not right. It's not my fault. There's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with the environment. And I refuse when my employer talks about, all employers talk about, like, employees are family, we care about our employees, and we all know that's bullshit, right? I'm pretty sure we all know that's bullshit. I don't know, I think some people believe it, which is crazy. I used to believe it, but was very quickly disillusioned. I think the point is that we can choose to, even if verbally disagreeing would risk our jobs, and, in some cases I think, if your integrity is telling you to risk your job, then risk your job. Like, that is a morally neutral decision. To choose to speak up or to choose to not speak up, it's whatever fits with your own personal feeling of what needs to happen. But the point I'm trying to make is, even if you choose not to speak up because you're not willing to risk your job, or it's not worth it in that instance, it's still power. It's still a point of power reclamation to refuse to internally align yourself with the falsehoods that these people are saying. It's still an internal power to choose to stop trying to conform yourself. And I think that is a lesson that I'm still learning, because I still feel very, very powerless. You know, the research shows that, I should say I got this from the book Rage Becomes Her, which I strongly recommend. And I will link both of these books in case people haven't heard of them, in the show notes. Anyway, I need to get better about citing my sources. In that book, which does cite its sources, it talks about how women typically associate anger with feelings of powerlessness, and men typically associate anger with power, with feeling powerful. That's because society listens to male anger. It demonizes, pathologizes, dismisses female anger. And this is something that I struggle with, because I feel so angry and so powerless so much of the time. But something that is helping me to feel, and has helped me to feel more at home in my own body, even in the face of this injustice and this anger, is recognizing that it is still power to choose not to agree, to choose not to go along, even as simple as to choose not to berate yourself or not to judge yourself any longer. I do think that is a point of power. So I do think it's sort of a 2-point shift that I'm talking about here that helped me to feel more at home in my body, in who I am, that helped me to make more of a home for myself and stop worrying so much about making other people their own comfortable home, right? Or making my home more accommodating to other people and that sort of thing. This is all figurative language, of course, but I think the 2 steps are, like, first, just recognizing, or maybe 3 steps. 1, recognizing and calling out this pattern of how being autistic, having EDS, generational trauma all converges to create this sense of alienation and discrimination and all of these things. And this sense of homelessness, internal homelessness, like calling it out. Then allowing that realization to change shame, blame, self-erasure with comprehension, grief, context, self-trust, like allowing that shift to happen. And then finally, maybe something I'm still working on is like recognizing, there's nothing wrong with me. It's my environment that needs to change. And even in the face of being powerless to do much about that, there is still a certain power in refusing to internally go along. There's still a certain power in doing whatever small things I can, even if it's just an internal disagreement with the prevailing narrative that it's somehow my fault, that, oh, I just can't keep a job because there's something wrong with me. Even just refusing to go along with that, even if I genuinely can't keep a job, which is debatable. Even just that internal disagreement that it's not anything wrong with me, and also that someone's ability to keep a job does not define their self-worth. That also goes counter to the prevailing narrative, right? So anyway, I don't want to ramble on too long about this, but I stopped asking what was wrong with me, right, and started asking, how do I find environments and processes that work with rather than against me? And I think this is allowing belonging to become something that I can take with me. I can belong wherever I choose to belong. I don't have to belong, I don't have to force myself to belong in the place that I was born into. I don't have to force myself to belong in my birth family, in the discriminatory workplace, in capitalism, even in society as a whole. Belonging can be, it's something that I take with me. I can belong in autistic Discord communities that feel right to me. I can belong with the 2 friends that I have made who love me for who I am. I can belong with myself wherever I happen to be at the moment. And those people that I don't belong with, I don't have to take their opinion into account. Yeah. So, and also for the record, it also helped me to feel immensely validated after finding others who had experienced similar things with similar outcomes. Like, hearing other autistic people talk about their struggles in the workplace. I mean, on the one hand, it makes me really sad. I don't like that so many of us have had all of these very similar experiences and outcomes. But on the other hand, it's very validating. There's nothing wrong with me. That to me very much points to it's the environment. It's not us. So the point of that is to say, I do think it helped me along this process to have other people and communities that could kind of reflect these experiences back to me and help me to feel validated. And I hope that in a small way, perhaps this podcast can provide that service to someone who's listening. In sharing my experiences, perhaps others who have had similar experiences could feel a little bit less alone and move a little bit closer to recognizing that it was not your fault. It was not. It is not. It's not you. It's the environment. So I also shifted my perspective to see love and belonging as a mutual process, sort of like, dating or like a job interview, right? Love and belonging is not about me trying to prove my worth to other people, or it shouldn't be. That is how a lot of us grew up. That's how I grew up, but that's not how it should be. Love and belonging is a two-way mutual process. Like what a job interview, let's pretend that we're in a society where people are not desperate for jobs in order to survive. Then job interviews would be, in their ideal form, more like, oh, are you a good fit for me? Am I a good fit for you? Not just am I, as a potential employee, a good fit for your company, but is your company a good fit for my values and my working style and all of these things and my interests? And same for dating. When we're dating from a healthy, secure place, it's not, oh my God, let me prove to you that I'm lovable and you should love me, which is something I've definitely done in the past. From a more healthy, secure attachment place, it's, can I love you for who you are? And can you love me for who I am? And do we fit together as we are? And can we meet each other's needs? But it's not just about what I can do for you. It's also about what you can do for me. It's not just about how I fit into your life, it's about how you fit into my life. And so, I just think love and belonging in general is that sort of mutual process. Not just, oh, do I fit okay into my environment? But is my environment even a place that I want to belong in? And in many cases, like capitalism, for instance, for me, or a very discriminatory workplace, the answer is no. I may have to be forced to be in these places, but I do not want to belong in them. Anyway, I think this is getting a bit long, so I'd like to wrap this up. But just to summarize, I guess the one takeaway is, rather than continually asking what was wrong with me, I started to ask what was wrong with my environment and the cultures that I had been born into, and what could I do to refuse to continue going along with this environment or these cultures and perspectives and all of these things. And I think that, in summary, recognizing the pattern and then making this shift internally allowed me to feel a little more at home in my body, even in the face of A lot of marginalization, trauma, anger, injustice, and all of those things. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. If anything in this episode resonated with you and you'd like to share a thought, reflection, or bit of feedback, you're very welcome to email me. And if this podcast feels supportive or meaningful to you, I'd appreciate it if you left an honest review or shared it with someone who might also find it helpful. That's how this work finds the people that it's meant for. You've been listening to Home is Where the Body Is. I'm Jen, and I wish you a safe journey home.